everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kazuyo, and I represent JCIE USA, the host of this webinar. We are a policy-focused U.S. nonprofit organization working from Washington, D.C. and New York to deepen understanding of Japan in the United States and strengthen U.S.-Japan cooperation on issues of mutual interest and concern. I am actually in Tokyo this week, and we have big news to follow here in U.S.-Japan relations. The first woman prime minister was just elected yesterday in Japan, where President Trump is expected to visit next week. And with that in the background, today's webinar will focus on the two countries' mutual interest to form a partnership with Africa that achieves shared growth. We decided to organize this webinar recognizing that with increasing fiscal and political pressures on ODA, both countries are seeking a more investment-focused partnership with Africa as the new frontier. For Japan, with a super aging and shrinking population, Africa's young and growing population offers a growing market and workforce, while Japan's advanced technologies and experiences in areas like energy, healthcare, and infrastructure can help spur innovation and youth employment in Africa. Commercial diplomacy is now also at the core of U.S. engagement with Africa, which emphasizes trade and investment over aid. And these approaches seem to align with Africa's own push for greater self-reliance and equitable partnerships away from a charity-based model of development. We have four very knowledgeable experts with us today to help us explore the views from Japan, the US, and Africa on how to strengthen this partnership with Africa for mutual prosperity, particularly through greater contributions from the private sector, and why that's important. Joining us from Tokyo, Japan is Mr. Shuhei Ueno, Deputy Director General of the Africa Department at Japan International Cooperation Agency, also known as JICA. Also from Japan, but based in Nairobi, Kenya, is Mr. Hiroki Ishida, Director at AAIC Partners Africa Limited. Our third speaker is Mr. Joshua Meservey, Senior Fellow at Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. And last but not least, we have Professor Scarlett Cornelissen, Professor in the Department of Political Science at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, who also directs the university's Japan Center. Thank you all for joining us today, and I'd like to also thank the Toshiba International Foundation for sponsoring this webinar. Our plan for the next hour is to first ask each of the speakers to address a few questions and then follow up with additional questions, including from our audience. To our audience, please feel free to submit your questions anytime from the Q&A button below. Let me first turn to Ueno-san. Thank you for joining late in Tokyo. In his current capacity, Ueno-san is in charge of the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, known as TICAD, which is a multilateral forum that Japan helped launch in 1993 to discuss African development. And it convenes African countries, international organizations, and other stakeholders, including the private sector. Ueno-san, Japan just co-hosted the 9th TICAD in Yokohama this August. We were hoping that you can kick us off with a little bit about TICAD 9, including its outcomes and how it relates to the key pillars of Japan's Africa policy. And in that context, if you could also touch on the Japanese government's efforts to incentivize more private sector investments in Africa, I'd appreciate it. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. About TICAD, as Kazuyo-san mentioned, which is an international conference started in 1993, and actually it really the base for Japanese cooperation with Africa or for Africa. JICA and Japan, we do many kinds of cooperation, let's say from infrastructure to trade to the investment, health, education, environment, peace and stability, etc., etc., etc. But it has kind of philosophy in it, which is ownership and partnership. And those two philosophies actually came from the discussion with African leaders going back to the TICAD 1 or 2. And it's really embedded in Japan's cooperation for Africa. And I think Kazuyo-san mentioned that, the importance or significance of this TICAD 9 held in 2025. I'd like to mention this ownership and partnership are really confirmed at this time in 2025. Ownership, in other words, meaning that the African-led development. Africa should lead on development. And partnership means that the other countries help Africa, together, collaboration. And in this world, currently, we know that many developed countries reduce ODA, and the world class or world level fragmentation is increasing. I think it's very much important that this TICAD emphasize that African development should be led and implemented by Africa, and international cooperation or international communities partnership should work for them. And those good concepts are really featured in this TICAD 9, and which I think has significance. You also mentioned that some of the outcomes of TICAD 9, I would say that this TICAD 9 has the largest attention than ever. I think it featured roughly more than 200 events, and it achieved more than 300 MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. And if you are there, we recognize that a significant presence of Japanese companies, and it has lots of attention from Japan and Africa. So it attracts the people all over the world. And although there is no pledge by Japanese government, such as 30 billion US dollar at the time of TICAD 8 in 2022, but actually if you see in detail, Japanese government together with AFDB, African Development Bank, announced 5.5 billion co-financing, which is an increase from the last TICAD 8 in 2022. So it has certain outcomes, including, for example, JICA's impact investment around 1.5 billion. So I think it has certain importance in this current world, and it has certain outcomes. You also mentioned about private investment, private companies. Yes, there was huge significance, the presence of the business at the TICAD. I also would like to mention that it really strengthened or expanded the variety of participants, not only development people, but business people, but also academics and people who are interested in African culture. And also, JICA held one event which invited 7 other emerging donors, including Indonesia, Thailand, Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Mexico. And those emerging donors, together with JICA, discussed their African development. So it expanded the variety of the participants with a significant presence of Japanese business.
Thank you so much for reminding us of the philosophy behind TICAD, ownership and partnership. I also hear the word co-creation a lot, which is the title of this webinar, and also the scale of TICAD in terms of the range of participants and new impact investment and co-financing initiatives. Since you mentioned the private sector participation, this is a good time to turn to Mr. Ishida, Ishida-san, at AAIC, which is an investment and strategic consulting services firm, you focus on investing in the healthcare and innovation sectors. In Africa. You are based in Kenya, which I believe is the second in the number of Japanese company presence after South Korea, South Africa. We'd like to hear about how you incentivize your clients to invest in Africa. And given that your company is also very intentional about supporting the growth of innovative companies to solve social issues as they also make commercial gains, if you could also speak a little bit about your experience with social impact investing and how that can be successful, I would be grateful.
Thank you, Kazuyo-san. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Hiroki, and at AAIC, we primarily invest in the healthcare sector in Africa, as Kazuyo-san mentioned. And today I'm joining from Nairobi, Kenya. And then first point, the maybe benefit of investing in Africa. So in the past, Japanese companies were facing the challenge to start business in Africa, such as a lack of information or finding the right partners, or maybe infrastructure was weak. But things have changed. I moved to Kenya in 2015. For the last 10 years plus, especially the startup ecosystem has changed a lot. Then by investing in them, either maybe directly or through funds like us, a Japanese company can now expand their business presence in Africa. Many startups today, they are building a kind of business to provide like logistics or payment or maybe access to the customers, which is quite difficult for the Japanese company to develop by themselves. And especially without partners, it costs a lot to find a partner for the payment logistic each. And then, for example, recently, one of our portfolio companies, they provide micro medical insurance in Tanzania or Ghana as African countries. And then the cost is only $3 for the customers monthly. And can you imagine that $3 medical insurance is profitable business in this continent? The secret is that all the payment is done by mobile money, so they don't need to make a call in case the customer fails a payment. Also, they utilize the user telemedicine as a gatekeeper, so that members first make a call, not instead of like visiting clinic, hospitals. Then the gatekeeper, the call center, they have a consultation with the patient. Then most likely, let's say 80%, they don't need to go to the physical clinics. Then they can just get a medication delivery, then which also reduces the cost dramatically and then makes the business sustainable. Then using that kind of platform, now they have access to over like 7 million population in Africa, also in Asia. So by partnering with such kind of startup company, Japanese company also can access those million people. And then also they can provide their services or products. That is one of the way or how they can invest in a startup company in Africa. Maybe you might think still that you can have a partners without investing in the company, but investing in those companies, the relationship is going to be very strong. And then also they have a more clear partnerships with providing their services in Africa. And maybe the second point, how we motivate Japanese investment in Africa. I like this topic. And then I think, well, first I'd like to mention that access to the information has changed dramatically for the last 10 years. I started pitching investing in a fund in Africa in 2013, more than 10 years ago. At that time, nobody believes that, oh, it does work in Africa. But finally, we were able to set up our funds in 2017, which focused on the Africa, which was the first venture capital from Japan, focusing on this continent. After that, other venture capital, including the corporate venture capitals, were established for this continent. Then we develop a strong pipeline, also share those pipelines or information with our investors, LPs, or other corporate. Sometimes we organize a roadshow to Japan. Also this year, we invited 9 bottle companies from Africa to Japan to pitch their business in Africa. So now, including us, also other venture capital or corporate, I think even people are in Japan, they have more access to what is happening on this continent. Maybe another major factor opportunity can be the consumer market. Traditional business such as like tea, coffee, gold were existing for many years. But recently, as obviously the rapid growth of urban populations also increase their disposable income, and then with Japanese company also see the opportunities in this continent. It sees as a market. And then also modern retail is being developed across this continent. For example, this year, Toyota Tsusho, one of the Japanese trading company, they acquired the largest pharmacy chain in East Africa, which called Good Life. And then also investment, but the company started as a startup company. They started only one pharmacy, but now they have over 150 branches in East Africa. So utilizing those pharmacies, maybe Japanese also company can provide their service product. And then I believe the reason they made an investment is they know this kind of market because also in Japan, we have a similar business model, a pharmacy drugstore chain in Japan. Now it's being dominated by a few players. Then originally they started selling only drugs, but now they sell like drinks, food, and any things. And then people just go there to buy many things. And also, I believe similar things happens in this continent. Maybe another example for, especially for the audience in the US, I believe people know like CVS Health, CVS Clinic, pharmacy. Also, similar business is happening in Kenya and other African countries. Some of the people travel to the US and then they sold that model. Then they are trying to providing a similar model, like more like rapid diagnostics, affordable. So then maybe people see this kind of model, for them, it's quite easy to understand what's going to happen. Then it motivate them to make an investment. And lastly, maybe I'd like to mention about the social. Sorry, somebody's calling me. Sorry. So social impact investing. I think in Africa, especially in the healthcare sector, social impact investment is essential. For the venture capital, which was born in the US, typically we have like 10-year fund life, and then maybe we have to exit after 5 to 8 years after we make an investment. But sometimes it doesn't fit well to this continent because of timeline, healthcare, it takes time. So here we need more like co-investment or co-working, like Ueno-san mentioned. Sometimes we call it blended finance. Fortunately, Africa, we have more players like academic, also DFYs, donors, also private companies like us. And then combine so many like players, then we can provide a different finance and then create a good cycle. Then right now, like matching finance is getting popular. But what I see as a challenge is we have more like debt providers. They make a commitment, but they want equity investors to make a commit to provide a loan. But we have less commitment from the equity side. So that's something that kind of bottleneck at this moment. So we'd like to encourage more like private investors to make an investment so that as an ecosystem, we have more capital being injected in this continent. Yeah, I think I covered what you asked. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I picked up the importance of finding partners, but sounds like the environment is becoming more conducive for Japanese companies. And I also appreciate you offering some concrete ways that you're trying to directly engage Japanese companies with the African business leaders. I would now like to, we've covered Japan's sort of JICA's view and the private sector view, and so I think this is a good time to now focus on the US side. Joshua, I'd like to now turn to you to speak about the United States, which is, of course, Japan's single most important ally. As a leading U.S. expert on Africa policy, I was interested to hear from you about the broader strategic rationale for the U.S. to invest in Africa and specifically the factors also motivating the U.S. private sector. And in addition, having learned about the Japanese engagement in Africa from the two speakers, we're hoping that you could share some thoughts on how the United States can perhaps cooperate or coordinate more with its allies, including Japan, when it comes to investing in Africa. So Josh, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks for inviting me to this panel. It's great to be here. Yeah, so I'll tackle the first question first, which is sort of what is the strategic rationale from an American perspective for investing in the continent? I think there's a couple here. So first, national security is involved for the United States. This is most relevant, I would say, around critical minerals. This is a major topic of conversation in the US, in Washington, D.C., especially, and it's only this concern around the vulnerabilities in the American critical mineral supply chain have only grown more pronounced over the years, and even within the last few weeks, as China, which dominates the refining of many of these minerals, is increasingly aggressive about using that leverage against countries like the U.S., but others as well, and even Japan, going back about a decade ago is when it started. Africa has anywhere from 30 to maybe 35% of global reserves of some of these key minerals. For some of them, it's an even greater share: cobalt, platinum group metals, etc. So the United States is trying very hard to incentivize American investment into African mining. It's actually a key part of a peace agreement that the U.S. is trying to broker between Rwanda and DRC. Within that agreement, and sort of the premise of the agreement is economic considerations focused on critical minerals. So there are, and I won't belabor the point about why critical minerals are important to the United States economy and also to our defense sector. That's probably pretty well known. So that's the national security, or one element of the national security impulse for the U.S. The other, I would say, is a question of influence on the continent. So the United States is very concerned about adversaries getting strategic positioning on the continent. Most relevantly, perhaps, would be an Atlantic Ocean military base. That is a concern in Washington, D.C. And if let's again say China got such a base, they would be able to hold the U.S. homeland under continuous nuclear threat if they had nuclear submarines, for instance, at such an outpost. So that's obviously a massive concern to American military planners and American politicians. So investing, every African country is facing this real crisis of youth unemployment, and they desperately want help with that issue, and American investing can help with that, and that's a way to build influence and potentially have leverage in these countries when discussions around national security issues, including bases, comes up. And then I would also offer that investing, I already referenced this a little bit, can help with issues like youth unemployment, poverty, disease on the continent. Many of these problems stem from underdevelopment, and I think it will require it will require private sector-led growth to ameliorate some of these concerns. And all of these problems that stem from underdevelopment can lead to migration and instability, both of which concern the United States as well as our European partners and Middle Eastern partners, and et cetera. And then finally, Africa is proximate to shipping lanes and undersea cables, which are, particularly, well, both of them are sort of the lifeblood of the global economy, including to the United States. So again, this is the theory of the case is more American private sector involvement on the continent, more investment will translate to more influence for the U.S. and it can better defend its interests in these areas. And then there's an economic rationale as well, of course. So I think Hiroki-san already referenced that there's a potential massive future consumer market growing on the continent. American companies and investors are aware of that, but also potential labor sources for outsourcing and et cetera. Now outsourcing is sort of an unpopular topic of conversation in the United States currently, but there is a reality that all across the developed world, populations are declining very rapidly, but Africa's populations are growing very rapidly. So Africa might be able to meet some of that mismatch. A very exciting tech scene on the continent, financial technology, which again, Hiroki-san was talking about. So I think the mobile money and all the mobile banking applications are interesting to American tech companies. Biotechnology would be another factor here, another potential massively lucrative field for American companies. And then there's some more traditional industries, oil and gas. You still have major American oil companies active all over the continent. This huge Mozambique gas field is heavily invested into by the U.S. government, actually, through Exim, but there's also American company involvement. And then finally, maybe this is a little more abstract, but the economic activity in Africa does influence the development of international norms and regulatory setting. And the US wants Western standards for technology, regulatory environments to pertain across Africa. And that is an obvious advantage for Western companies if that is what happens, and it would have an economic benefit for the United States and for Africa. From the American perspective, perhaps some would disagree, but the U.S. believes that Western style standards around regulations and norms and labor norms and laws and environmental and all of these things would redound to the benefit of Africans themselves. So that's sort of the strategic case in very quick and broad strokes for the United States investing and being more commercially involved in Africa.
Thank you. I just want to follow up. It sounds like a lot of the rationale probably applies to Japan as well. Do you see any areas for greater U.S.-Japan coordination and cooperation in terms of investing in Africa, maybe jointly creating this norms and regulatory foundation as you spoke about?
Yeah, and thank you for prompting me. I forgot the second part of your question there. Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think this is critical for the United States. I think when you look at the scale of the challenge for the US in Africa, it's well beyond the capacity of the US to handle on its own. So I think it has to work very closely with trusted partner countries. I would certainly include Japan on the very short list of the highest trusted countries for the United States. And Japan also brings certain capabilities that the US just doesn't have anymore. So when we think about infrastructure, for instance, the US has very few infrastructure companies anymore that are active globally. There's maybe two that I could think of off the top of my head. Japan has a number of world-class infrastructure companies. And infrastructure is a major challenge on the continent. It has obviously, there's economic ramifications to the infrastructure question, but also, again, national security implications for the infrastructure, for certain infrastructure on the continent. If we think about ports, for instance. So I would like to see much greater sort of institutionalized cooperation even between the US and Japan. In Africa, I think infrastructure again would be an obvious potential area of cooperation. But on certain projects, Japanese technology could be highly useful. I think you know when we consider the Libido corridor, which is an infrastructure corridor that the United States is backing, that will run from sites in DRC and Zambia to Libido ports in Angola. The United States wants that to be more than just simply a transportation corridor. It wants it to be linked into other industries. It wants it to be tech-driven, and so that it can have as great an impact as possible. And I think that's another obvious. So on discrete projects like Libido, I think there's real opportunities for some of Japan's world-class companies to be involved, and maybe also even the Japanese government with financing or but that takes coordination and it's hard, and that's why I think trying to institutionalize cooperation maybe through certain routine meetings between the relevant bureaucrats on the American and the Japanese side, or something like that could be useful.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting, and I appreciate you broadening our view on U.S. and Japanese engagement on Africa with the national security lens, and also reference highlighting the importance of strengthening critical mineral supply chain for the United States. We can't complete the session without hearing the African perspective, and so I now like to turn to Professor Cornelissen to basically learn how this all sounds from your perspective, especially from South Africa, where you are based. You're an expert on Africa's relations with Japan and Asia. So our questions to you initially were threefold, which is what makes Japan a unique partner for African countries? What are the relative strengths of Japan's private sector investments in particular? And where you might see potential for more growth in Japanese investment. So we can start there.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel and this discussion. I'll start off by responding to your first question about what the value is of relations with Japan from an African perspective. And first to note that it is actually a long-standing relationship, politically and diplomatically speaking, as well as economically speaking. Not many people are aware of this. Japan is often seen as a new actor on the African continent, but that's not the case. For example, we are celebrating 115 years of diplomatic relationships, of a diplomatic relationship between Japan and South Africa this year. And Japan's development cooperation to Africa started back in 1966, so that's also six decades ago. So because of that long-standing engagement that Japan has had with the African continent, there has been opportunity for that relationship to deepen in trust and reciprocity. And in terms of the development cooperation relationship, Japan's support to the African continent has been wide-ranging. It has spanned different economic sectors. It has been inclusive of quite significant support for large-scale infrastructure development, but also for energy development and support to social sectors, health, education, water, sanitation, and so forth. So because of that character of Japanese development assistance to the African continent, that has facilitated and built trust, mutual trust, I would argue. And it has also enabled Japan to develop some kind of normative influence on the African continent. As Mr. Ueno has indicated, ingrained in the DNA of Japan's development cooperation is the emphasis on partnership and ownership. And partnership and ownership are slogans that resonate with African parties. Then secondly, TICAD. TICAD, when it was innovated or invented by Japan in 1993, it went against the zeitgeist. And it was also significant because this was in the context of growing Western aid fatigue, Afro-pessimism, and so forth. So Japan actually took quite a bold step in establishing the TICAD. And TICAD has grown to become the central pillar in Japan's relations with the African continent. It has grown in relevance, efficiency, and impact. And also progressively, the business agenda has started to be promoted through TICAD, where there has been a consistent effort to encourage Japanese private sector to consider Africa as an investment destination. So in a sense, TICAD has started to structure corporate interests on the African continent and vice versa. I want to say something about Japanese private sector involvement on the African continent. Comparatively speaking, Japanese FDI stock is still quite small compared to where the focus is for Japan's FDI globally, but it is increasing. And it has a lot to do with the way in which there has been a concerted effort to introduce, for example, blended financing between Japan and Africa to encourage Africa as a viable investment destination, and to, for example, consider the ways in which the growing African population should also be considered as a valuable consumer market. So over time, there's been a change in the Japanese private sector engagement on the African continent. And maybe 4 key points to highlight here. There's been a change in investor attitude. There's a keener interest to explore investment opportunities on the African continent. There's been a diversification in investment by the Japanese private sector in terms of the sectors and in terms of the types of markets that are explored. There's been diversification in terms of the types of firms or companies that have been entering the African investment environment. So we're seeing now investment across the entire spectrum of types of companies, from the large multinational corporations, the truly global companies, right up to the small and medium and micro enterprises. And there's also been a change in the mode of investment. In the past, it used to be quite traditional, joint ventures, franchising, licensing. Now we're seeing increase in mergers and acquisitions, the acquiring of or the establishment of subsidiaries by big Japanese companies in Africa and so forth. So what the strengths are of the Japanese private sector engagement in Africa? I've mentioned this aspect of blended financing, which has proven to be a effective vehicle for channeling capital in different forms of capital, different types of capital to Africa. The emphasis on ownership and on quality, especially. There's been a long-standing emphasis on infrastructure investment or support for infrastructure development, both physical, material, as well as social infrastructure. And then a significant feature that's recently become quite prominent is this emphasis on capacitating startups in Africa. So you're seeing that a lot of or venture capitalists are now developing an appetite to provide the financing for startups in Africa. Now that's related to the demographic dividend that Africa poses because of our youthful population and that we are a growing population. I want to end off by just talking about some areas where there could be, in a complementary way, synergies, both for the African side and for the Japanese side. First would be in terms of infrastructure, further and enhanced infrastructure development, support for infrastructure development on the African continent. Japan stands out for advocating for quality infrastructure, and that does resonate with the African parties, and digital infrastructure as well. Then climate change resilience and green energy transitions, providing support for that, and also bolstering public health systems. The two last points I want to make, because I know that our time is running out, are the following, and that is that Japan and Africa, despite the fact that we have a long-standing relationship, and as I've suggested, it's diversified and deepened over time, but we are at a crossroads within a unfolding geopolitical order, and we as two parties have to consider how to craft the relations from a set of foundations which has been about donor recipients to one of partnership and genuine partnership, and partnership that is fit for purpose in the unfolding geopolitical order. So how do we identify areas of alignment and synergy that are mutually beneficial? Then secondly, if there's going to be a real capitalization on Africa's demographic dividend, because it's not only a dividend for Africa, it's a dividend for the rest of the world as well. It's something of positive value for the rest of the world as well. But to capitalize on that, the fact that we by 2050, 1 in 5 in the world will be African. It will be a youthful population. To capitalize on the opportunities and the potential, it's important to develop skills. It's important to capacitate, and education is very important. So yes, we are within a context where national security considerations, of course, are at the top of the agenda of states all over the world, but it should also be in tandem with other priorities that relate to social impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for discussing the evolution of TICAD. There's a lot of optimism in what you have described, though a word of caution at the end. And I picked up infrastructure and trust as somewhat of a strength of Japanese investments that is also an area for U.S.-Japan collaboration to make sense. I have a couple of questions already from the audience, and I'll combine them somewhat with my own follow-up questions to each of you. Let me just ask each of you a question all at once, and then you can respond all at once. So my question for Ueno-san is about the official development assistance, and as we talked about ODAs on a downward trend in both the United States and Japan, this relates to one of the questions from the audience, but we now have a new prime minister in Japan who is known as a conservative, and some people in Japan, including this audience, is sort of wondering what the impact of the new government will be on foreign assistance. So my question will be, how would you explain the rationale for Japan to continue to provide ODA in Africa to any ODA skeptics in government or the general public, which is a challenge that I believe are some advocates of global health institutions, for example, are facing these days, including the Global Fund, and that this audience is asking about. Japan is we're expecting Japan to pledge soon for the Global Fund, and so that was brought up. So yes, Mr. Ueno-san, that is a question for you. I have a same question for Ishida-san and Josh. You have both laid out a lot of potential for investment growth, and but I think people have a lot of questions about challenges as well. And so it's what more can your respected government do to support private sector investments in Africa to address some of those challenges, and vice versa, what can African countries do better to attract more US or Japanese businesses into Africa? You mentioned a couple of them, but I appreciate if you can add a little bit more. And then similarly, Professor Cornelissen, from an African perspective, what are the challenges to invite more private sector investments to Africa, either from the US or Japan? So why don't I start with Mr. Ueno and go to Joshua and Ishida-san, and then Professor Cornelissen.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned about rationale for Japanese ODA for Africa, and I heard from Joshua that the American perspective and of the African importance for US perspective, the importance of Africa for US. I don't think Japan's perspectives are not much different from that, economic rationale or security or influence, etc., etc. And Professor Cornelissen mentioned about the trust or dividends for the world that Africa can provide for the world. If I explain simply to, let's say, Japanese people, I would use the word of trust. Investment in Africa is very much crucial for Japan to gain the trust globally, for trust for Japan globally. With this trust, Japan should not be, let's say, isolated politically or economically, and this enable Japanese business, as Hiroki-san mentioned, let's say, to export or import or to invest, to work easily, let's say, for in Africa. So, and as you all mentioned, Africa is a growing, the center for the world. If we look at 25 years from now or 50 years from now, we have to engage with Africa. So it's very much important. And you mentioned about Prime Minister. I cannot predict anything, but I have to mention that, new Foreign Minister, Motegi-san, played the role of Foreign Minister in the past. And the new Prime Minister is also from the same LDP. So in big picture, it shouldn't be different. There should be the coherence in the policy, including our cooperation for Africa. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Josh and Ishida-san, what can your respected governments do more to help investors invest in Africa? And what can African countries do? And maybe we can start with Josh.
Sure. Yeah, it's an important question. The United States government is trying to think through how it better incentivizes and supports American companies that want to be involved in Africa. I think it's taken a positive step in that it has made commercial diplomacy much more of a focus. So there is now an expectation that American embassies will be very proactive and forward-leaning in both promoting to the host country American businesses and American investment, and then also trying to support any American companies that are in those countries to win deals and sort of bring the full backing of the U.S. government diplomatic apparatus behind American companies. So I think that's good, and it should do more. The U.S. government should do more of that. I think it can also provide some technical help to African countries that are interested in updating or reforming or harmonizing their regulatory environments, some of which can be very, very difficult to navigate for American and I assume other companies as well. So I do quite a bit of work on mining, and mining codes are really huge challenges in some of these countries. So the U.S. government can provide certain technical expertise to help in those regards, which then in turn would help American companies that are interested in entering some of these markets. The U.S. does have some agencies that are designed to support American companies. So the Development Finance Corporation, the Export-Import Bank, and SBA, and some others. There needs to be a fair amount of reform done with those to make them more effective at their at their job, frankly. So they frequently are very slow. If they're providing financing, for instance, to an American company, that process might take 2 years, which in the business environment is too late. It's too slow. Highly bureaucratic, so they have to figure out how to streamline their operations to better support American companies. And then I think the U.S. government could provide certain tax incentives to American companies, particularly in industries that it views as critical to American national security. We've already discussed some of these. And then hopefully it can also provide that role of connecting American companies with either the governments or companies of other friendly governments, because there's also sort of B2B or business-to-business possibilities, I think, on the continent that the U.S. government could help facilitate. On the African government side, I already referenced the regulatory environments that are very, very challenging. So I think there needs to be both deregulation in some sectors, and then also better regulation in other areas. American companies want certainty when they're entering these markets. They want their contracts. They want to know that their contracts can be defended in court. They're worried about currency volatility. So those things, African governments can work on. Policy follow through. We already discussed infrastructure and security. So yeah, I'll leave it there since we're already running out of time.
Thank you so much. Ishida-san, I suppose you might agree with some of the challenges or areas for improvement that Josh mentioned, but over to you.
Yes, I do. And Josh, he covers pretty much topics. So I just focus on more healthcare sector, because healthcare also education is a kind of base of the country. And I have kind of thinking for the last 10 years, the kind of biggest challenge of this continent in the healthcare sector is the lack of insurance, medical insurance, which can be the basis of the healthcare sector. Because of that, many people paying out of pocket and being suffered from that kind of expenditures. And if we can provide more insurance, could be public or even private, then the size of the market can be easily double or triple, because people can access the facilities. And also, I'm aware of that JICA, for example, has been supporting this. For example, Kenyan government, developing the policies or achieve the universal health coverage, because Japan has achieved more than 50 plus years ago. And then it's helping a lot. But the challenge or problem is too complex, also deep. And for example, even right now, Kenya has a good policy in terms of national insurance, but the challenge is the execution, implementation, including corruption, unfortunately. And then what will happen for the facility is if they are not being paid by the insurance company, then they start stopping the welcome and hosting the patient, also stopping payment to the suppliers, payment to the service providers, which create a huge challenge for the startup companies, but not only for them, but also for other Japanese corporate. One of the reasons they hesitate to start a business in Africa is because of lack of the medical insurance and also those kind of challenges. I know it cannot be solved overnight, but if we, all together, both government, Africa, also Japan, could be US, and then develop a kind of nice healthcare system with a good implementation plans. Because now we have so many access. We don't need to create so many clinics. Now we can utilize the telemedicine. We don't need to hire so many radiologists. We can use on-demand teleradiology. So that now, based on the current context or available solutions, maybe altogether we can develop nice kind of insurance systems. Then I think automatically many people will come start investing in Africa or starting business in the healthcare sector. Also, which can be applied in any other sectors, though maybe problem is varied, depends on the sectors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are close to the end of the time, which is unbelievable, but the conversation was very interesting. I'm going to try to combine the questions and ask them to a couple of you. So two questions has something to do with JICA's, the initiative that JICA had to withdraw, which is called the JICA Africa Hometown Initiative. It was meant to promote greater exchanges between Japanese localities and African countries. But because there was a confusion that this is about immigration of a bunch of African resident Africans coming to Japan, it had to be withdrawn. So the question is, are there ways that we can sort of facilitate greater collaboration between African residents in Japan and the people in Africa, or just more subnational connections between Japan and Africa, if there are sort of initiatives that JICA has to do that aside from the hometown initiative. I think the audience may be interested to hear. There was also a question about challenges and opportunities facing African youth, and because Josh and Professor Cornelissen both highlighted sort of youth unemployment as an issue, if you have anything to add about additional challenges or opportunities for youth to prosper, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So maybe with Ueno-san, do you have any thoughts about facilitating greater engagements between localities in Africa and Japan?
Yes, thank you. So yes, some audience know about this hometown incident. Yes, it shows the certain Japanese people are very much anxious about, let's say, increasing foreigners in Japan. If you are in Japan, we know that, for example, if we go to the nearest convenience store, there are many foreigners who work in the convenience store. So it's kind of normal, but certain people in Japan, I guess, are very much worried about increasing number of foreigners. As I think Kazuyo-san mentioned, it's true that we need to discuss globally, internally in Japan. And I guess the new prime minister appointed a minister in charge of this foreigners issue in Japan. And we have to discuss in Japan, with including those people who are worried about foreigners living in Japan. What JICA does is that, we do international cooperation including sending, let's say, Japanese youth as volunteers, let's say, to work in 2 years in Africa, and they come back to Japan with lots of knowledge about Africa, and they promote, what will be the life or people in Africa within Japan. They are really, in a way, ambassador of international cooperation with Africa in Japan. It's the same as U.S. Peace Corps. We also invite people from developing countries, including Africans, to Japan to learn within Japan. So we do have lots of exchanges, and we continue and we promote these exchanges. And I hope that can be a base for the future discussion about this issue of foreigners living in Japan. Thank you.
Thank you for addressing that issue and question. On the youth engagement part, I would add Ishida-san to address it. If you have any thoughts on African youth and their challenges and opportunities, I will give you the final word before we close. Thank you for lending me a couple of extra minutes. Let me start with Professor Cornelissen, and then Josh, and then Ishida-san.
Thank you. So that was on the youth. I think I made my statement that of the importance of education and of providing opportunities for the youth.
Thank you. Josh.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think again, the youth unemployment issue is an existential one for many of the African governments. We just saw in Madagascar, a government was deposed essentially, in large part because of protests that were driven, at least in part, by unemployment issues, and I don't believe that things like ODA will adequately address this issue. I think it does have to be things like investment and economic growth. That is what will ultimately address the youth unemployment challenge, which is a huge one. So that's why I'm a huge advocate for greater. One of the reasons I'm a huge advocate for greater American investment into the continent.
Thank you very much, Ishida-san.
Yeah, then thanks. And providing the job for youth in Africa solves so many things, because also the securities, if they have more job, I don't think the issue of like security will also be decreased. And also recently some Japanese companies started hiring the people in Africa, and then also JICA, also Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan, and also welcome so many like students to study in Japan. And then what we are maybe missing is we can also provide the opportunity to work in Japan. And from Japan side, what we are facing is, yes, we currently have like foreigners from mainly Asia, but also hiring the good talent is getting competitive in Asia market, because they have also more opportunities globally also in their countries. But Africa now also we have opportunities. We provide a good talent, and also I see some like U.S. company hire the call center company in the U.S. They hired Kenyan people to provide the services to the U.S. people. So yeah, I see a lot of opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm sorry for going over time, but thank you for an engaging discussion. We may have only scratched the surface of many topics, but we hope to have a follow-up conversation sometime in the near future. I want to thank the speakers for helping us highlight partnership with Africa as a shared interest between the U.S. and Japan to stay coordinated on. I hope you can come back to join our future discussion on this topic again. Thank you again. Good day and good evening. We'll hope to see you again soon.